Just to introduce Sian. Sian is a daughter of a dairy farmer. She was involved in running her own successful dairy farming business for a number of years. 12 years ago, she went to Australia where she trained to be a succession facilitator, and she currently facilitates succession discussions with families and runs workshops for farmers around both the UK and Ireland. And I know from how important a topic succession is and from how good Sian is at her job that she's someone that has made a tremendous amount of difference to anyone that she's worked with, and I'm really looking forward to having her speak here today. So Sian, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to the organisers of the conference. It's really a real pleasure to be here again. Succession. Handing on the business to the next generation, but also maybe handing on the assets as well. Well, first of all, what do I know about it? Well, as you've just heard, as I always tell people, I'm a dairy farmer's daughter. I'm the dairy farmer's daughter whose brother got the farm and I got nothing. But that was fine and that was acceptable at that time, but it's not anymore. Well, I'm wrong, really. I did get something. I got a wedding because I then married a dairy farmer. And then I became the dreaded daughter-in-law. You know, the one that everybody's scared is going to run off with half the farm. And so I understand very much how difficult this conversation is and how awkward it can be. So, okay, let's talk about how people get it wrong. What is bad practice? Let's get the negative stuff out of the way. After all, this is the Positive Farmers Conference. So how do people get it wrong? What is the bad practice? Well, first of all, a lot of people don't do anything at all. They do nothing. They stick their heads in the sand and hope it'll go away. It won't. Succession will happen. None of us get out of this alive. And so it's going to happen. It's absolutely guaranteed. And so it's crazy that we don't make any plans for it. And often people don't. And the point is that the earlier you start planning, the more options you have. Because the later you leave it then, there are less options to deal with. So if you do nothing, there's a financial implication. We probably all know of businesses that have stagnated purely because they haven't thought out how they're going to plan their succession. And people are feeling very frustrated. Also, we spend most of our lives trying to avoid paying tax. Succession is not just about tax, but there is a tax element to this. And, we spend all our time trying to avoid paying tax and then don't do a succession plan and maybe land the next generation with a whacking great tax bill. So that's crazy as well. It also leads to family arguments. Because I can guarantee if you haven't talked about succession, and a lot of people come up to me and they say, oh, look, we really don't want to talk about succession. We're afraid the family are going to fall out. I can guarantee that if you are not talking about succession, there are family members who are feeling frustrated because they don't know what's happening, and also they're feeling insecure because they don't know what's happening in the future. So it's very unfair to be able to carry on doing that without having that succession conversation. And it's really unfair on that next generation. I heard a story about 6 months ago about a family in England, actually. And father had died. He was in his 80s. And he was the one who had the checkbook. And yeah, this is alive and well. I come across this very often. People in their 80s still the ones who are signing the checks. And in this particular instance, he was. And the son, who was the next generation, was in his 50s. He had never signed a cheque. He'd never seen the bank manager. He had never visited the accountant. And all of a sudden, here he was running this business. And the neighbours were really upset because they said every rep in that area was driving up that farm lane. And he was making silly decisions. And you can't blame the man because he had never been trained to run that business. And that's the sort of thing that happens if you stick your head in the sand and hope it'll go away. So succession is very important to start talking about. But what do other people do then that's not a good practice? Well, sometimes it's the older generation. I say, the older generation should be starting this conversation, but sometimes they don't start the conversation at all. They just decide what's going to happen without talking to anybody else in the family. They go off to the accountant and say, right, okay, this is what we want to happen, and that's it. And they don't tell anybody else in the family either. That is really bad too, because you really need to be talking to the rest of the family about what you're going to do. And often this decision is based on assumptions. People assume they know what the rest of the family want to do. I run an awful lot of family meetings now, and I can tell you, unless you ask the rest of the family what they want to do, you don't know. So never ever assume that you know what the rest of the family want to do in the future. And also then, because of that lack of communication, because they've decided what's going to happen, what often happens is the older generation will say, oh, you don't need to know what's happening, but you'll be fine. That's not good enough. Increasingly, sadly, in the last 2 years, I've come across a lot of mental health issues. And it's usually mental health issues in young people who are feeling insecure because they don't know what's happening in the future. I remember in particular one family in Scotland where there was a young man taking antidepressants. He was in his 30s, he was married with 3 children. He didn't own his house because it was owned by the farm business. He didn't own his car even because it was owned by the farm business. And he was, as I said, on antidepressants because he didn't know what was going to happen. And sadly, his father wasn't very well. And every time he did something that his father disagreed with, his father would say to him, if you don't do what I want you to, I leave the farm to your sister. So no wonder he was on antidepressants. So it's really important to spell out to the next generation what you're going to do. First of all, consult them, and then come up with a plan, and then tell them what's going to happen. Really important. The next sort of area that people get it a little bit wrong is when they half do it. Now, I always recommend to people when you're doing a succession plan, do the easy things first, because then you start building momentum, you know? And so it's really important to start doing the easy stuff first. But that's often where some people finish. They do the easy stuff and then they leave the difficult bits. The difficult bits, what are they? Well, they're different for each family, but I would say definitely the 3 Ds: death, divorce, dementia. You know, people are scared to talk about that within a family. And also things like what happens if the asset holders are taken into a nursing home? And will the asset be taken to pay for their care? Now, those sort of things are game changers. They can affect that business very dramatically. So it's incredibly important that people talk about that. Now, if you feel you can't talk about it, then it's important to get in a trained facilitator to help you to talk that through. Because it's very important that you do talk those things through. But sadly, some people just don't manage that, and they should. The last area then that I will also say as well is that what some people forget about is doing a will. Everybody has to make a will. No, you know, I've heard every excuse under the sun for not making a will. None of them are valid, right? Everybody should have a will. And also you need to think about power of attorney as well, particularly as people get older, but even for young people. So often now in businesses that I deal with, everybody, once they become a partner in the business, has power of attorney for themselves. So that if something happens to somebody, there is the facility to be able to act on their behalf. So that's bad practice. So what's good practice look like then? What's the positive stuff? Well, good practice is people starting early. When people ask me, when should I start thinking about succession planning, I say as soon as you have children. Because you will need to grow your business to the size of your family, which is a great form of birth control when you think about it. But you will, because you will, although not all of your family may want to farm, you will want to give all your children a good start in life. So you will need to think about that. So the earlier you start thinking about this, the better. And starting that conversation, talking about it around the breakfast table like you do anything else. Because succession has become this elephant in the room that everybody knows there, but everybody's frightened to talk about it. So we need to start talking about it to our children. And then, so the really good people, they start doing that. They start making plans. They have options at that stage. They also have regular meetings about succession. Succession is a part of good governance of a business. And so at least once a year, you should be sitting down and talking about succession. You know, what have you done in the last 12 months? how much progress you've made, what are the changes that we need to now integrate into our succession plan. And so it needs to be talked about at least once a year. And businesses are doing that. When I started out in this business, I was just called in for the one meeting. But now, increasingly, really good businesses are calling me in on an annual basis just to make sure they're keeping track in what they're doing. What else are these good people doing? Well, they're including everyone in the discussion. Some families I go to and they say, we don't want to include all the children because some of them are not going to farm. So we don't want them to be there because they might cause a fuss. I can guarantee you if they're not included in the discussion, they will cause a fuss. It's really important that they're there having that discussion with you because then they become part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. So everybody needs to be there to understand what's happening and understand why things are being done. Very important. And also you need to put timelines. Good people put timelines on everything. They've got a plan, they have an action plan, and they say, right, okay, these are the things we need to be doing. This is the date we're going to do it by, and this person is responsible. And one of the big dates that you put in is when does the overall responsibility for the business pass from one generation to the next. Put a date on it. It varies from family to family because of different ages and experiences. But put a date on that so that the older generation can work towards it, but also the younger generation can make sure that they have the ability and the experience and the knowledge to be able to run that business when that date comes. So there we are. So that's good and bad practice. But let's look at a little sort of side as well of what makes a good successor. How can young people prepare themselves for being good successors? Well, obviously it's education, but it's not necessarily farming and education. You can picture the story, can't you? You know, mum and dad sitting at the breakfast table with the children, and the children saying, Mummy, Daddy, when we grow up, we want to be a vet. And you were saying, well, okay, if you want to be a vet, you're going to have these qualifications, and you're going to go to university, and you're going to study for this many years, and that's when you're going to then become a vet. Mommy, Daddy, when we grow up, we want to be farmers. We want to farm this farm. What are your questions to them then? What is your answer to them then? What are the qualifications that young people will need in the future to be able to run that business? And it may not just be on agriculture, it may be business studies and that type of thing as well. But what's very important as well is what experience will they need to be able to run that business? I say with increasing confidence that young farmers, I know they want to come home sometimes and have a crack at the business, but it's far better if they go and experience working for other people first. Other farmers or even in other industries as well. So they get a broader education and a broader experience so that when they come back to the family business, it's because they come back, they choose to come back rather than they can't think of anything else to do. Believe it or not, I come across quite a lot of families where, and this is probably strange for this gathering here, where the parents are saying the young people aren't willing to take on the responsibility. And that's, sad as well. So if as a young person, if you're coming back to that business, you must be prepared to take on that responsibility. Also, there is the other side then that the older generation must be prepared to hand that responsibility on to the younger generation. Most young people I come across, they really want responsibilities, so it's important to do that. And also, I think it's very important that young people, when they're coming back into the business, have access to assets that they can borrow against to then grow the business for themselves. Because I think, there are some very good young people out there and they deserve the opportunity to come out and grow that business themselves. Well, what of the older generation? We've talked a little bit about the younger generation. What about the older generation? There's a saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think that's very true of agriculture. We do stand on the shoulders of giants. And that older generation are the giants that we're standing on. And it's very important to acknowledge that and to appreciate what they've done. And then to be able to find a role for them in the business going forward if they want it. And so clarifying the role of the older generation is very important. Managing their self-esteem is very important, and acknowledging what they have done for you. Because, if it hadn't been for their work, there would be no business to hand on to the next generation. So it's really important to be able to discuss with them what they want to happen in the future, what their role is going to be within the business and what their position is, so that they feel secure going into the future as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit now at the end, near the end of this speech, but it's a very important thing. I'm very privileged today to be sharing the platform with some of the Shared Vision group. I know a little bit about this group. And I'm not joking when I say I feel privileged. I do. I do feel privileged. They're a group of very good young people, and I know there are other groups as well of similar ilk. When I go and speak at some farming meetings, I'm often asked by an older farmer, well, what do you do if you haven't got a successor? And I always say there are tremendous young people out there who deserve an opportunity. And that's what these members of the Shared Vision group are like. There are an awful lot of young people out there who are not going to inherit a farm. So they have to work extremely hard to get where they're going. These people are of very high caliber. They have to be, because they're competing. They're competing for the opportunities that are out there. And also they're very determined, because they're having to go against the flow all the time. They're having to prove themselves. And so we as an industry, and everybody else, and everybody in this room, should be really responsible for trying to get these young people into the industry. Because we're doing the industry a huge disservice if we don't get them into this agriculture industry, because they are of tremendous caliber and they are going to be the future. So when I talk to older farmers and they say, well, I haven't got a successor, or maybe I want to hang on because my grandchildren may want the farm in the future, this is an ideal opportunity to give an opportunity to a young person who is not going to inherit a farm. And as I say, they're very good. Okay, you've got to work it out. There have to be proper structures in place. And you need to talk to somebody like our chairman here, Paddy Kelly, who's an expert in what sort of structures you need in that situation. And if it's in the UK, I know Tony Evans from Anderson's is here. He is an expert in the UK on the structures there. But what better thing than to be able to give a young person a chance in this industry that they wouldn't normally have? Really important that we do that. And as I say, it's important for all of us to be able to promote that. And so that's why I'm very, very pleased to be sharing this platform with these young people here today. In conclusion then, this is a great industry. And as I said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We need to retain that expertise. And we can't do it properly without a proper succession plan. Not having a succession plan is probably one of the biggest risks to a farming business. You know, forget about the weather events and disease. Not having a proper, robust succession plan could mean the end of a farming business. I'm sure we all know of court cases where, you know, businesses have had to go to the wall because people have been quarrelling about farm businesses. So it's incredibly important to sit down and have that conversation. And we are doing the industry a huge disservice if we are not encouraging young people in. I am privileged to meet so many really good young people, and we need them in the industry. So we need that structure to be able to bring them into the industry and to give them responsibility and to be able to let them to grow and innovate and do the new things that we need. We've heard from Pat Dillon earlier about the challenges that lie ahead. These young people are being equipped to face those challenges, and it's exciting times. So we must make sure that they come into the industry.
And I'll start get the ball rolling, Sian, as chairman. And actually, it's funny because I have a very personal insight into chairing this section, because in one way, I'm ashamed to say that at home at the family farm, we had our first proper succession conversation over Christmas. Right. In one way, I'm ashamed to say that, well, say I'm 28 years of age, my younger brother is farming in partnership with my parents. I'm ashamed to say that was the first time it started, but I'm proud to say that we started it. And my question for you is, how do you prepare the different members of the family to come to that succession meeting and maybe have themselves prepared in terms of what they need to have thought about or prepared about? What would you advise someone in terms of preparing the family for it?
I think it's very important to sit down and think about where you are at the moment and sort of think about timelines. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And really sit down and think about that, you know, and particularly for the older generation, I would say, you know, once you're sort of do you physically want to be milking cows when you're 70? You know, that type of thing. So in 5 years' time, do you want to be milking cows? Or where do you want to be? And for the younger generation, what is their vision for the business? Where do they want to see this business in 10, 20 years' time? So yeah, setting timelines and that sort of thing is where you start that conversation.
And what about for the people then that are maybe not farming in the future? What sort of things do you think they need to have thought about before the...
Yeah, the same thing for them, you know, and what are their expectations as well. And I think it's very important. I always say to people, you don't have to be equitable to be fair. Just because a farm is worth 3 million quid or whatever, doesn't mean to say that that amount then has to be given to all children, because we all know that the value of the farm bears no sort of relationship with its earning capacity. But you need to include that, so the other siblings who are not going to get the farm need to understand that. So that's why they need to be in that meeting. They need to understand that. They need to understand that if for everybody to have an equal share, that farm would have to be sold. You know, it's interesting, I have never, ever, ever come across a young person who has forced the sale of a farm just so they could have an equal share. Never. As long as they understand what's happening. And so, you know, looking at what they expect in the future. And sometimes it's a very good idea, if you possibly can, to get these siblings paid out, you know, whatever they're going to have, at an early stage, so that the young person who's running the business then doesn't have this thing hanging over them, that at one day they're going to have to pay brothers and sisters out, and they don't know how much it's going to be, and they don't know when it's going to happen. Whereas if you can pay them out at an early stage, it's good for that person, but it's also good for the other young people as well, because then that's when they need the money. You know, that's when they may need the site to build their house, or that's when they need to pay off student loans, or that's when they're starting their own business. So that's when they need to, that's why starting this at an early stage means that you have the ability to give everybody an equal start in life. Okay?
Super, thanks, Sian. Any questions? Question down here, yeah.
I'd just like to ask, it's generally simple enough to know what to do with the farm, but how do you put in place a plan to give the ones that aren't getting a farm a fair share in life? I mean, to say, if you keep investing and building up your farm, eventually those who aren't going to get the farm will have lesser assets. Is it prudent, in other words, to invest some of the profits in a business for 10 or 12 years before you retire into something that is divorced from the business, that you can separate out and give to the members who aren't getting the farm? Yeah,
I think that's a really good idea. That's why I say we should be starting this at an early stage, so that when you have the good years, you think, right, okay, I've got money to invest. Okay, we can invest some in the farm, but it's important to invest off farm as well, so that there are other assets that those children who are not going to inherit the farm, so that they can have. Because I know that farmers, once you build up a business, you're very reluctant to then split it up. I remember going on one of Mike's tours to New Zealand in 2013, I think it was, and we were speaking there to a family then. I think the family had grown the business to 2,000 acres, and I think there were 2 or 3 children. And the older generation were very reluctant to split that business up, although they could. I mean, God, it was 2,000 acres, for God's sake. You know, they could have split that up between children. They didn't want to, because they felt pride in how they'd built that up. So you've got to be aware of that and say, well, right, okay, maybe we should be investing in other things like the house down the road in the village or whatever, so that those are things that won't impact on the core business, but then can be given to other children or sold, so that they can have cash to be able to do with what they want.
Great. Any other question here? Yeah.
Hi, Sian. Katie from Staffordshire. You mentioned before that you were potentially, can't imagine, the dreaded daughter-in-law. What do you sort of suggest that parents can do in that sort of scenario how can they stop it from escalating?
You mean from the parent side? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important that even if you're a parent and your son or daughter gets married, that you welcome the in-laws into the family. You may not want them in the business. That's the problem, I think, is that often people are scared because they think, oh my God, you know, if there's a divorce, they're going to run off with half the farm and all that. And they tend to hold them at arm's length in some cases. So it's really important. If you don't want your in-laws as part of the business, that's fine. That's your business. But for God's sake, welcome them into the family. Make sure that they are, you know, welcomed into the family and they feel part of the family. And make sure that they understand what's going on as well. Don't hide things from them. Because even if you're not talking to them about it, you can bet your son or your daughter is telling them anyway. So don't be so secretive about things, and make sure that they feel that they're valued and they're an integral part of the business. I have done family meetings in families where it's just before a wedding and they've had the prospective daughter-in-law or son-in-law in the meeting, and they've been fabulous. Absolutely fabulous meetings, because then that in-law that's coming into the business has an understanding of what the business is like, and also the rest of the family were asking, well, what would you want to contribute? And sometimes, you know, these people who are coming into the family, maybe they may be able to contribute to your business. So it's a good idea to sit down and talk about that as well. So yeah, welcome them into the family, very important.
Thanks, Sian. Any other questions? I have a question down here at the front, and just maybe while we're getting a mic to it, Sian, just talk us through the process. You mentioned there that you've actually been involved in a premarital discussion where someone was joining the family. Give us a feel for what the process is of working with a succession facilitator like yourself. How do you actually approach? Do you meet individuals and then meet as a family? What does it involve?
Some people, the way I was trained anyway, is that I meet with the whole family. Straight off. Some people say, oh, well, you know, I want to talk to you beforehand, and sometimes they've insisted that they talk to me beforehand, but it's always been a waste of time, because you don't need to convince me what's happening, you need to convince the rest of the family. And so I much prefer to get everybody in round a table in a neutral venue, so that then nobody's sitting in mother-in-law's kitchen or whatever. So it's a neutral venue, and everybody, and then I sort of talk to each person then, with everybody else listening. And so and I don't need any information beforehand, because you're the ones, okay, you bring information with you to the meeting that day, but I don't need to be talking to individual family members beforehand, because then I am not independent. And that's my advantage over an accountant or anybody else, is that I'm completely independent. And so if I started talking to other people beforehand, well, there's a question there that maybe I'm not independent. So no, I have the whole family there in a neutral venue, and it's quite relaxing. You know, people are really scared when they come into these meetings, but they really, you know, we often have a lot of laughs and things like that as well. They can be great fun. And the members themselves prepare, but I don't need any information at all, because I'm just facilitating that discussion. I'm not making any decisions, and that's important. The family has to make the decision, because they're the ones who have to live with it.
And usually from there, do the family then meet themselves afterwards, or do you? Yeah, that's
what we do then. We have an action plan. They have a record of the meeting, and also we have an action plan then. And invariably, there'll be how often they're going to meet again. And what we're doing now is saying, right, okay, people are having business meetings now, which is better communication within the business. They're having strategic meetings so that they have better business governance as well. And they're even talking about AGMs, you know, where they talk about succession, maybe have the accountant in, the bank manager in, that type of thing as well. So that they're running the business, and they're continually having meetings about this. And and also in that action plan, then we have deadlines of who's going to do what and by when. And so you have to have a meeting then to make sure things have been done. So yeah, we always have, they put in their calendar then, regular meetings. And what's important is we always have one person who is responsible for making sure those meetings happen. Because you know what it's like, we go to somewhere and think, oh yeah, that was great, you know, we had a great time then, and nobody ever does anything about it afterwards. Or you know, we say, all right, we're going to meet the first Tuesday in the month, and then silage happens or whatever, and you know, people forget about it. So if you put somebody in charge to make sure those meetings happen, then they do, and they carry on with them then.
Is that normally the mother of the house, Sian, or is that...
Not always, no. We try and look for volunteers, but sometimes you have to force somebody. But no, it's surprising, you know, and some people, you know, a lot, particularly the younger generation, they want to do it because they want to make damn sure that meeting happens, you know. So
Excellent. We have a question here in front.
Okay, David Range, Cheshire. Once you've got the family together and you've had the meeting, you've come up with a plan. How do you structure the final... you put down on paper, and it becomes a legal sort of structure so people are understanding, and as maybe your children they get married, see other people come in, people are aware of where the direction's going. To have a plan, like hip in your head or in a rough note in the office desk is one thing, but to actually have it so that people know where they're going, what is the final outcome from those meetings? And
Yeah, we do come up with a plan, but you have to remember that things change. And so it's a developing plan, it's a rolling plan. It's like your business plan, really, succession plan is. Okay, you know, it's not good enough to say, right, we spent the last 6 months and we've got a succession plan where, hey, that's it. Because things change. That's why you need to review it a lot. And so you have your succession plan, but then you need to review it because things will change. Tax things may change. As you say, somebody may get married, somebody may die, somebody may have a divorce. So you need to keep updating it. That's why it's a living plan. It's a living document, just like your business plan is. And so you need to keep on revisiting it and making sure it's relevant, and then conveying it to all the family so that everybody understands what's happening.
And I think emphasising that this is a process that's continually going, because again, I mentioned that we had our first proper conversation about it, and one of the clear things from the first conversation is that it's not going to be the last, because everyone needs to go away, think about it again and come back. Exactly. So it kind of reiterates that this is a continual thing. But then I suppose maybe with the specific things that are written up, they probably just get legalised in the will. Is that fair? Some things will be legalised and clarified in the will, and other things will be part of...
Some things will have to be, and particularly, say, for instance, if you've got young people who are not going to farm and they've been given an asset or something like that, you need to make sure that that's written down so that, you know, to say that, right, okay, they've had their share, so that they don't come back then and say, well, hang on, I want a bit more now. You know, so what the ideal thing is when you come out to this family meeting is you have a piece of paper with your plan. Invariably in the action plan will be visit the accountant and visit your solicitor. And so when you go to your professionals then you will have this plan with you, and they like it. Because then they say, thank goodness, because now we know exactly what the family want. Rather than the accountant or the solicitor saying, well, this is what you should do. You're going to them with a plan that's been agreed by everybody, and then they can put it in place. So if there are legal things that need to be done, then your solicitor will do it for you. And if there are tax things or implications, well, the accountant will sort that out for you. So this is the plan. So the ideal thing is sitting down as a family first, and then going to the accountant or the solicitor.
Super. Just if anyone has any final questions on succession, they might. I'll take one or two more afterwards. So just put your hands up. Yeah, I've one down here.
Hi, Sian. Matthew Jackson, North Wales. Looking at it from the other side, being from a non-farming background, when does succession become relevant to me and my young family? And at what age? Is there a certain age when these talks should start?
I know you, Matthew, and I know you've got young children. You should be starting talking about it now. As I say, we don't want it to be this taboo subject, because that's what it seems to be, isn't it? People are afraid to talk about it, so we need to start talking about it and thinking about what your children want. An example of this was I was with a family. I was called in for an afternoon just for a brief conversation. They were beef and sheep farmers in the middle of Wales, right? When they had their third son, because they had 3 boys, when they had the third son, they thought, right, okay, we need to think about what's going to happen if all these children want to farm. And so they sat down and made a plan at that stage when the youngest was a baby. And they said, right, okay, well, we can probably grow this business to increase it to 2 farms, but we probably won't manage 3. So what we'll do is, every time we've got spare cash, we're going to put it in a really good account, a savings account. So that will be for the one of them that doesn't want to farm, because we have to assume that they may all want to farm. And when I was called in, the lads at that stage were in their late 20s and early 30s. And they'd done it. It was brilliant. They had done it because the two eldest were in farms, but they had a farm each. And the youngest one, he was the one they gave the money to, and they'd given him quite a substantial amount of money because they'd saved it over the years. And he was the right one they gave it to because he was entrepreneurial. He had already started his own business, he'd already started buying land, and he'd built his own house. So, you know, that's why you need to start early to think about, right, okay, what if all these kids want to farm? I need to be able to grow this business to accommodate them, or, you know, be able to have cash or assets to be able to give them so that they all have an equal start in life. That doesn't mean to say equal money, but equal start in life.
Cool, I'll take my last question, so here.
Hi, Bernard Baxter, Dairy Australia. The ultimate goal, I guess, for families is to keep the family together. That'd be the parents' number one aim. You've spoken about how ultimately, in your experience, no family has had to dissolve their asset and sell the farm, but there will be at times very challenging and difficult conversations. And how do you manage those difficult conversations when someone's probably not prepared to compromise and they're trying to push their argument? How do you keep that family unit together in after the meeting and everybody still leaves the meeting content?
A lot of this has to be done at the meeting. This is where my training comes in, and that we have to get everything out in the open at that stage. And so if somebody is being really intransigent, we have to point out to them the consequences of their action or their inaction. So, it's interesting, in a family meeting, everybody gets an opportunity to speak. And in some families, that's unique, because often they don't sit and speak about it. And often people, I very often get a phone call saying, oh, you'll come, you've never, oh, we've got a really big problem. It's never been as bad. You will never come across a family that's as bad as this, I get that all the time, and I've done a few now. And so it's very important that everybody in that meeting has an opportunity to speak, and without interruption, and so they can speak freely. And it's amazing how in these meetings I'll come across someone who, like dad or mum or whoever is being very intransigent. They are not going to move at all. But once you give them the opportunity to get what they're moaning about off their chest, it's amazing how they change. Because all of a sudden they say, right, okay, I've got it off my chest. Everybody understands me now, understands what I'm feeling. And then they feel much more able to go on and make a compromise. So listening and communication is the key. And so it's making sure that everybody is listened to, everybody is understood, and so that everybody's aims and everybody's concerns are addressed. That's really important. And so nobody is pushed into a corner and forced to do anything. I have come across one or two families where there has been a very intransigent person and they won't change at all. They will not change at all. And so my job then is to coach the rest of the family to realise that this person isn't going to change. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand to change Grandad, I wish I did. And so then I have to bring the family to realise, okay, that person is not going to change. What are you going to do about it? And help them to realise the choices, the choices they have then, realising that this person isn't going to change. So sometimes we have to face that as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that was a great conclusion, Sian, that sometimes you actually so people won't change, but you can still help others to manage that. It's a nice point. So.